The first thing she said to the Vethkai was hello. Not a transmission burst. Not a coded diplomatic opener. Not the 18-syllable acknowledgement protocol that the Interstellar Contact Bureau had spent 4 years hammering into every registered envoy. She walked to the thing in the corridor of Docking Bay 7. This creature that stood 2.5 meters tall, with its secondary eyes half open, and its translation collar clicking. And she said hello the way you'd say it to someone on the street, like she knew them. Like she'd been expecting them. Her name was Alice Reyes. That was the name on her transfer orders, anyway. The Vethkai, his designation was something that the collar rendered as Loreth, stared at her for a long moment. His primary eyes, the large amber ones, tracked down then up. The secondary pair, set lower in the jaw like vestigial things that hadn't decided yet whether they were eyes or not, stayed fixed on her collar rank. Hello, he said back. The word came out strange through the translation collar, too flat the H aspirated into something almost percussive. But he said it. That was 900 hours on the first day of the Vethkai negotiation aboard Relay Station Miriam. By 900 hours on the 4th day, 11 people were dead. The station was on auxiliary power. And Alice Reyes was sitting a holding cell across a bare table from Loreth, with nothing between them but a scratched polymer surface and the question of whether she was going to live out the week. She'd been a xenolinguist before she was an envoy. Before that, she'd been a data analyst on the colony ships, the ones that punched into systems the surveys said were clear, and found out the surveys were wrong. She was good at sitting with things that didn't fit, with contradictions, with gaps in the record, with the particular silence that meant something was coming, and you just didn't know yet what shape it would wear. The official story of the Relay Station Miriam incident was that it had started as a resource dispute. That was true the way a flame is a chemical reaction. Technically accurate, completely insufficient. The Vethkai had arrived with 3 warships and a list of territorial claims that overlapped with 4 human colony installations, 2 military outposts, and a deep space hydroponics platform that fed 60,000 people. The Bureau had sent a negotiating team of 9, plus support staff, plus Alice Reyes, who was listed in the manifest as a junior translation consultant. She was 31 years old. She had a small photograph tucked into the lining of her jacket, not for sentimentality, she'd have told you, just to remember what she was here for. Loreth was the Vethkai's strategic arbiter. The equivalent rank in human terms was something between a general and a judge. He had negotiated 11 territorial contracts in the last 30 years, and all 11 had ended in Vethkai expansion. He was not known for patience. He was known for knowing exactly how long any given human would hold before they told him what he actually wanted to know. He had a habit, Alice noticed in those first hours, of using a phrase that the translation collar rendered as "come closer." It meant different things, depending on context. Sometimes it was a command to approach, sometimes an invitation to speak frankly, sometimes what seemed almost like a taunt. He used it the way some people use a hand gesture, unthinking, habitual. Reflexive intimacy or reflexive dominance, she hadn't decided which. The negotiations broke on day 2. She had been watching Arbiter Commander Solen, Miriam Station's senior military officer, a compact man with a gift for condescension, push back against a Vethkai territorial concession that was, in Alice's estimation, genuine. Not generous, not friendly, but genuine. Solen had called it a feint. He'd said so loudly, in front of Loreth's entire delegation, and the translation collar had rendered the word with perfect fidelity. The Vethkai did not faint. It wasn't cultural pride. It was something deeper than that. Something structural in how they communicated. The same way some languages had no word for a particular kind of longing, because the culture had never needed one. To call a genuine offer a feint was not an insult in the diplomatic sense. It was a category error that rewrote everything that had been said in the room as false. Loreth had gone very still. That was how Alice knew. She'd tried to speak. Solen had spoken over her. He did that often. 14 minutes later, Loreth's escort had locked down the station's docking arms. The support staff had scrambled for their emergency protocols. And, somewhere in the confusion of that, someone on the Vethkai side had made a decision that 3 of Miriam Station's maintenance crew had died for. She didn't know who had given that order. She still wasn't sure it had been Loreth. She filed the uncertainty and kept moving. The second day was a series of attempts to re-establish communication, all of which failed, most of which failed in ways that made things worse. The third day, Solan had managed to get a distress signal out. The fourth day he had tried to reach the Vethkai command vessel directly, bypassing Loreth's delegation, and had been removed from the equation in a way that left the 11 dead and the station on emergency power. Alice had not been removed. She wasn't sure if that was an oversight or a message. When they brought her to the holding cell, she sat down. She folded her hands on the table. She waited. Loreth came in 40 minutes later and stood on the other side of the table and looked at her, and she looked back at him, and neither of them spoke for a while. "Come closer," he said, eventually. Not a command this time. Something else. "I'm as close as I'm getting," she said. He sat down. The translation collar clicked and hummed between them. The room smelled like recycled air, and something metallic that she couldn't identify. Not blood. Something older than blood. The station's lighting system had dropped to 60% efficiency after Solan's maneuver, and the holding cell was dim, the shadows sitting heavy in the corners. "Your commander," Loreth said, "made a declaration of false dealing. You understand what that means for us. I understand what you believe it means. There is no belief involved. There is only the record." "The record," Alice said, "is in how you heard it. He doesn't understand your grammar of sincerity. That's not an excuse, it's a fact." He saw a concession and read it as a trap because that's what he would have done in your position. Loreth was quiet. "He was wrong," she said. "The concession was real. I know that. I've been watching your delegation for 4 days. And I know the difference between when you're maneuvering and when you're offering something. You weren't maneuvering. And yet your commander called it a feint." "My commander," Alice said carefully, "is no longer in a position to be wrong again." Something moved behind Loreth's primary eyes. She held his gaze. "You speak," he said, "as if the truth changes what has already occurred." "I speak as if the truth is the only thing that gets us out of this room." He leaned back. She'd learned, watching him over 4 days, that the lean was not retreat, it was how he recalibrated. He was reassessing her. "Why were you not evacuated with the others?" he said. "The first emergency protocol, you remained. I stayed. Why?" She thought about the photograph in her jacket lining. 60,000 people on a hydroponics platform, colony installations. Families that had been out in those systems for 15 years, building something from nothing. In the dark and the cold, and the absolute absence of guaranteed outcome. "Because someone needed to," she said. "And I was here." He didn't speak for a while. She waited him out. She was good at waiting. "Your bureau," he said, finally, "sent you as a translator." "They sent me as a junior translation consultant." "Yes." "You are not a junior translation consultant." She met his eyes. "No, who are you?" The question was very quiet. She understood, in the specific way you understand things that are happening to you, rather than around you, that this was the question the entire 4 days had been leading to. Not what was her rank, not what were her orders, who was she? What kind of thing was she? What did she want badly enough to still be sitting in this room? She had a name that wasn't her name. She had orders that had ended when Solan made his catastrophic error. She had a photograph and a set of skills, and about 30 years of watching what happened when people didn't bother to understand each other. "My name," she said, "is Jane. That is not what your insignia indicates." "No," she said, "it's not." He looked at her for a long time. The secondary eyes shifted. She had worked out by day 3 that the secondary eyes were not vestigial at all. They tracked micro-movement, the small physiological tells that the primary eyes were too dignified to chase. They had been watching her hands, she realized, the whole time. Looking for the small, nervous gesture that would tell him she was lying. She put her hands flat on the table. "Here is what I know," she said. "I know you didn't want this. The lockdown, the deaths, that's not what you came for. You came with a territorial claim that has genuine legal basis in the Vethkai record system. And you expected either a negotiated resolution or a principled refusal, not a human commander who reads sincerity as weakness and mistakes your grammar for deception. You are now in a situation that your honor system doesn't have a clean exit from. If you retreat without the concession, you lose standing. If you press the attack, you start a war that kills 60,000 civilians on a hydroponics platform and doesn't actually resolve the territorial question. And somewhere on your command vessel right now, someone is arguing that the attack is the only coherent option remaining." The light in his primary eyes did not change. "I have a counter-proposal," she said. "Not from the Bureau, not from the dead hierarchy in this station. From me. You have no authority. I have exactly as much authority as any individual human ever has, which is to say the authority of the argument I can make and nothing else. She leaned forward. Which is also, by the way, why we are not as easy to negotiate with as you expect. We don't have a clean hierarchy of binding commitment. When you reach an agreement with our official channels, we have 100,000 individuals in the affected systems who will comply or not comply based on their own assessment of the deal's fairness. You can't lock that down. You can't win it by force. You have to convince it. He said nothing. You know this, she said. That's why you're still sitting here. You could have handed me to your security staff an hour ago. You're here because you know that whatever I say next is the closest thing to a real answer you're going to get. A long silence. The caller clicked softly, translating nothing. Come closer, he said, and this time it was neither command nor invitation. She didn't have a word for what it was in any language she spoke. An acknowledgement maybe. A concession of its own. She laid out the proposal in precise, unhurried language. She spoke about the colony installations not as human territory to be defended, but as facts on the ground that predated the Vethkai claim's current interpretation. And about the two outposts as negotiating currency that the Bureau had always been prepared to trade. She spoke about the hydroponics platform, in terms of what it would cost the Vethkai in long-term diplomatic standing to destroy it. And she spoke about the 4 Vethkai claims that had been buried in the original paperwork under language, that Selene had clearly never read. Claims that were, she said carefully, not unreasonable. She watched his eyes the whole time. The secondary pair, the ones that tracked lies, gradually stopped moving. When she finished, he was quiet for a very long time. You are a strange kind of diplomat, he said. I'm not a diplomat at all, she said. I'm a translator. I translate what people actually mean into language the other side can hear. And what do your people actually mean? She thought about it. She thought about colony ships punching into dark systems and building things without guarantees. She thought about Selene and his catastrophic small-minded certainty. She thought about the photograph in her jacket and the 60,000 people who had no idea this conversation was happening. They mean, she said, that they want to live here, in these systems, in the dark. They're terrified, and they're stubborn, and they don't know how to stop wanting what they've built, even when it puts them in rooms like this one. That's what they mean. That's all they've ever meant. Loreth looked at her for what felt like a very long time. This is not how negotiations proceed, he said. No, she agreed. The record is compromised. The official process is, he made a gesture she couldn't fully interpret, gone. The official process got 11 people killed, she said. I'm not particularly attached to it. He stood. She stayed seated, watching him. He walked to the far wall, turned, walked back. The movement was slow and deliberate, the recalibration she'd seen before but longer this time, deeper. If I accept your counter-proposal, he said, I accept it without the standing of your bureau behind it. Yes. If your bureau repudiates it when contact is re-established, then you'll be right back where you started, Alice said. Except that you won't have killed 60,000 civilians. The war won't have started. And you'll have documentation of a good-faith human offer that your diplomatic corps can use to establish precedent. Worst case, you're ahead. She paused. And best case, the humans in those systems, not the Bureau, the actual people, will know that the agreement exists. And I told you how human compliance works. He stopped. She watched him think. She had learned to watch the thinking, the slight compression around the primary eyes, the stillness of the secondary pair when the mind was working hard. Your name, he said. Jane, the other name. Which is the lie? Neither, she said. One is the name I travel under. One is what I am. He looked at her. Hello, stranger, she said. It was the phrase she'd heard him use. Not the translation caller's version of it, but the Vethkai original, the syllables she'd been memorizing for 4 days. It meant something between greeting and recognition, the acknowledgement of someone known under an unfamiliar face. The expression that moved across his features, she filed it carefully. She hadn't seen it before. She didn't have a name for it in any language. He reached into the fold of his garment and set a small object on the table. She recognized it, the primary seal from a Vethkai binding record. It meant he was speaking on the record. It meant what came next was real. Let us, he said, proceed. The station lights came back on at full power 3 hours later. The docking arms released at hour 5. The Vethkai warships moved to holding distance. Not departure, not advance, holding. waiting for the bureau contact that Alice had told Loreth would come within 48 hours. Once the distress signal reached a relay, she sat in the empty negotiating room after the Vethkai delegation returned to their ships. In the chair that was still Solen's technically, the one at the head of the table with the bureau seal on the back. She ate a ration bar that tasted like cardboard and something that was trying to be apricot. She looked at the photograph. Not a romantic gesture, just a reminder. The way you check a compass bearing in the dark. 60,000 faces she didn't know. Systems she'd never walked in. Someone had built greenhouses in zero gravity and made them work. Someone had taught their kids the names of stars that didn't have names on any chart. Someone was out there right now, not knowing how close it had come. She put the photograph away. The bureau contact came in at 31 hours. There were 3 separate senior representatives on the transmission, and all 3 of them had very strong opinions about the authority by which she had conducted the preliminary agreement, and she listened to all of them. And then, she explained very quietly that the agreement existed, and the war did not, and that the latter was what they had sent her here for, even if they'd called her something else on the manifest. One of them told her that she was technically not authorized to have used her real designation in the negotiation. She said she understood. She didn't say, "I said my name was Jane. I didn't use a designation at all." She didn't say, "You sent me as a translator. I translated." She said, "The record is intact. The Vethkai seal is on it, and Arbiter Loreth will expect the formal response within 72 hours. The final agreement took 4 months to negotiate properly. She was not involved in those negotiations. She had no standing officially, and the Bureau was not particularly eager to advertise the unorthodox start. She followed it from other postings the way you follow something you started in a dark room and couldn't watch finish. It held. That was the important thing. It held in the way agreements hold when both sides have looked at the alternative and chosen this instead. Not warm, not generous, but real. Both sides kept to it because both sides understood it. That was what she'd been there for, not to win. Not even exactly to survive, to translate. She was somewhere else by then, on another posting with another name on the manifest, sitting in another station's intake corridor, watching a new alien delegation arrive. She had a photograph in her jacket lining. She had 30 years of watching what happened when people didn't bother to understand each other. The first member of the delegation to come through the airlock stopped when it saw her sitting there. She didn't know this species. She didn't know their grammar of sincerity, or their secondary eyes, or their term for the recognition of a known face. She was going to have to learn. She looked up. "Hello," she said. The way you'd say it to someone on the street.